Hellos and welcomes everyone, and Wolf here bringing you a new Let's Play of Star Wars The Old Republic. Of course developed by BioWare back in 2011 and published by Electronic Arts. This is a game I have played numerous times for both myself and the channel, and yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. This will be the third time we are visiting the Sith Inquisitor story arc here on the channel. I have been playing Star Wars The Old Republic since its inception, since the beta, and I have recorded my journey with the Sith Inquisitor twice in the past, both with Yevrà and with Morathi. With the back end of, or seeing the back end of 2022 out, I decided to return to the game with an Imperial agent and with a new Jedi Guardian. And during those journeys, I felt so motivated. There was certain extra content I was exploring that was really inspiring me to return to a Sith character. Because it's fun to be bad, it's fun to be cruel and evil at times. And so I decided to decide on how to roleplay a new Sith character. And I thought of a fun way, and so here we are. For those of you who have seen any of my playlists, any of my playthroughs previously, you know what this first part of the series is all about. It's an introduction to the game, giving players, or giving viewers, who may have not played the game yourself, a bit of background into what to expect, some of the lore and history of the game, and where we find ourselves as a character, and then we'll move ourselves over to character creation. But let's get ourselves into things, shall we? So, this game, of course, Star Wars The Old Republic, is, I suppose, officially the third in the title of the Old Republic saga. For those of you who may not be aware, this is of course set in the Star Wars universe, makes sense, and while most people know the movies from George Lucas and LucasArts and Lucasfilm, this series, this saga finds itself approximately 3,500 years prior to the events that most people know and love. In addition, BioWare, who developed this game, brought out two earlier titles, known as Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. These games are set approximately 300 years prior to the events that occur here and now, so we're kind of sandwiched between the previous two BioWare titles, which do indeed have some relevancy to to the Old Republic that we are embarking on here and now. And we find ourselves in a rather interesting period in Star Wars galactic lore. For there are two major factions within the known galaxy. You have the Galactic Republic, which has spread out to the majority of the known galaxy. Many worlds, corporations, many species have joined the Republic and its democratic process for building each other up for the greater good and defending themselves from anyone who would do each other harm. There are numerous neutral worlds, which of course trade with one another and trade with the Republic, but in essence, even though there has been some turbulent times, especially with the Mandalorian Wars, which occurred almost 300 years prior, or about 350 years prior, something along those lines, we have now got the second major faction, the return of the Sith Empire, which had disappeared maybe about a millennia ago, maybe a little bit longer, during the Great Hyperspace War. The Sith Empire is coming from almost the north of the galaxy and has conquered numerous neutral and Republic-aligned worlds. This war, known as the Great War, went on for about 28 years, and the Republic was losing terribly. I mean, yes, they managed to gather their forces and start pushing the Empire back, and indeed winning various battles, but the Empire went as far as sacking the capital of the Republic's empire, well, the Republic itself, known as Coruscant. And it was during this moment that the Republic was forced to sign a rather humiliating peace treaty, a ceasefire with the Sith Empire. This peace treaty basically allowed the Empire to gain hold and ownership of the worlds they had conquered. And where we find ourselves as a character is 10 years into this truce, into this ceasefire. And the Republic and the Empire are certain factions within both of those major entities would like nothing more than to restart a war and end it once and for all to eliminate either the Republic or the Empire. Now, even though the Empire had been plotting and planning its return for many centuries, building up its forces, building up its military, the Great War did of course deplete numerous resources from the Republic and the Empire both. So much so that the Empire has had to relax some of its ancient traditions. One of those traditions is going to become extremely relevant for a Sith Inquisitor character, which we'll talk about more once we get ourselves into character creation. So, what else should we talk about? We'll talk more about maybe some of the lore, some more of the background of the two major factions once we get into character creation. One thing I want to mention is more about what to expect from this series. Similar to, I would like to make this series similar to my time with Caiaphas Cain. I tend to do a lot of what I call long Let's Plays, but even in those series in the past, there are numerous side quests, optional quest chains that I've never visited as an Imperial player, and I would like to explore them and learn more about some of the background, some of the world building that BioWare created for us all. And as a Republic aligned character, Caiaphas Cain, my Jedi Knight, explored the Republic side of those quest chains, and now I would like to do the same with an Imperial character, which is kind of why we're here. So, what I'm going to do is give a pause now. I'm going to get myself logged into the game, and we'll get ourselves over to character creation, and then we'll talk more, as I say, about both of the major factions, and more about our character prior to their arrival at the Sith Academy. But I will see you in just a moment. And welcomes back, everyone. So, let's get ourselves into character creation, shall we? For those of you who may be interested, I am playing on the Darth Malgus European server. And let us begin, shall we? Ignore the Onslaught and Legacy of the Sith option, of course. We do have one or two level boosts, where we could begin at level 70. But as always, I like to begin at level 1 at the beginning of the story. And the beginning of our journey, indeed. And now we get to choose our allegiance. Let us briefly go about talking about the two major factions once again. There used to be a bit of a blurb, a bit of text. They've changed how character creation used to be. Used to be a bit of text to tell you more about the factions you were joining, more about your class as well. In fact, very briefly, I may go search for what it tells us about the Sith Inquisitor once again. But in terms of the factions, we'll look at the Galactic Republic first, of course. The Galactic Republic was founded over 20,000 years ago by various different species, corporations, diplomats, all coming together and sending senators to represent their individual or planet's interests and working towards the galactic greater good. Now, during the Great War and in this period of truce with the Sith Empire, things have not been particularly great for the Galactic Republic. They lost a great many worlds to the Empire, and even some of the neutral worlds are very hesitant to join, afraid of what may happen if war breaks out between the two major factions once again. The Galactic Republic has a major refugee crisis going on, even on their capital world, where a lot of the infrastructure on a lot of their worlds may have been damaged, and as such a lot of people were displaced. The Republic's economy is probably going rather strong, but a lot of that money is still being funneled to the military to rebuild, to shore up their defenses, and to keep an eye on what the Empire is up to, of course. As for the Jedi, during the sacking of Coruscant, the Sith led a major assault on the Jedi Temple there, and basically turned it into rubble. A great many Jedi died in the process, and it's only due to their Grand Master, or their newest Grand Master, Satele Shan, who rediscovered one of the ancient homeworlds of the Jedi. The Jedi have since withdrawn most of their Force users back to this homeworld to begin rebuilding their order, to begin training the next generations of Jedi. In fact, when on Typhon, if you're playing as a Jedi Consular or a Jedi Knight, there are even Jedi Masters discussing within the temple if and when they should return to the Republic. That it's not their place maybe to return, but for the Republic to ask for their aid once again. They're afraid of what the future may bring, that their numbers may dwindle even further if war breaks out once again. They lost a great many of their champions fighting against the Empire on the front lines. And then of course we have the Sith Empire, ruled by the all-powerful and immortal Sith Emperor. The Sith Empire is basically a militaristic autocracy where one may, if they have the ambition and capability, rise to a great position of power, and yet a grasp on power can be always loose, always tenuous, as there are always people seeking to rise up and take your position or stab you in the back. As part of the Sith Empire, even though the Emperor's word is law, the day-to-day activities within the Empire are overseen by the 12 most powerful Lords of the Sith at the time. These Lords come together to form what is known as the Dark Council, and each of them has their own sphere of influence. One will oversee military offensive matters, one will see matters in regards to diplomacy, one sees matters in regards to gathering intelligence both inside and outside of the Empire. These spheres will often overlap, and you will find it is somewhat like a pyramid scheme where you will have a Dark Lord of the Sith, as a member of the Dark Council, followed by his or her fellow apprentices below him in positions of power, followed by maybe their apprentices below them. Similar to the Jedi, during the Great War, a great many Sith were killed in the battles. As such, some of the more traditional rules that we mentioned earlier have been set aside. It has been allowed, to great disgruntlement among the Sith, that non-humans may be allowed to potentially become Sith. Previously, only pure-blooded Sith or humans were allowed to train at the Sith Academy on Korriban, once Korriban was reclaimed, of course. Now, with their dwindling numbers, they are looking to seek new blood, new potential, and as such, anyone discovered to have force sensitivity may be taken to the Sith Academy and undergo training, and maybe, just maybe, become Sith. Of course, of the many acolytes and apprentices seeking to become Sith, many will fail, some will be cast aside, some will be killed, and some will probably be, well, there'll be other positions found for them, which is probably akin to death. Let's just put it that way. For those that are non-force sensitive within the Empire, but are not slaves, then you may still find yourself in a rather important position, say within the Imperial military or in Imperial intelligence. But basically, if a Force user, if a Sith, gives you a command, you are expected to obey it. So even those freshly out of the Sith Academy may command significant power within the Empire itself. And now we get to choose our origin, our class storyline, and we get to choose one of 8 combat styles. As I mentioned, we are of course going to be playing as a Sith Inquisitor. And we get to choose one of 8 force-sensitive combat styles. There are of course 4 dedicated purely to the training of the Sith, and 4 mirrored combat styles that a Jedi would normally undergo. As a Sith Inquisitor, you would normally have an advanced class choice between the Assassin and the Sorcerer, whereas a Sith Warrior could choose between the Marauder and the Juggernaut. Unfortunately, we can't choose a technical combat style. Those are reserved to the Bounty Hunter and the Imperial Agent. Which would be... it's a shame. When I first heard that they were changing this system to allow a wider variety of combat styles, I was wondering whether or not we could have, say, a lightsaber-wielding trooper, or maybe a Sith warrior wielding an assault cannon. Unfortunately, that is not to be. Our Sith Inquisitor is actually going to go pretty basic. We are going to choose to be a Sorcerer. We are going to be able to choose a second combat style, though I'm going to leave that until maybe the second or the third story arc before we choose to do so. As a Sorcerer, we get to choose one of 3 discipline paths to follow, though in safe areas like in the cities we'll visit, we'll be able to change our discipline. We can focus on healing with corruption, or dealing damage with lightning or madness. And now we get to choose how our character looks. I've already predetermined our character's appearance. We are, of course, going to be playing as a female Sith Inquisitor once again, mainly because I do enjoy the female voice the voice actress's efforts. She seems to enjoy her role within the Empire more than the male voice actor. And if you give me just a moment, I have chosen how my character is going to look. And there we are. This is our character for now. Of course, we'll see what happens when one drifts further along the path of the dark side. Our Zabrak here. Ooh, that is not what I wanted. Zabrak here is called Yevrà. That is her name that I have chosen. Going along with, of course, some Zabrak naming conventions. And before we go into a bit of background, I do want to see if I can find the guide about... That's not what I want. The Sith Inquisitor once again. This is the one I want, yes. The Sith Inquisitor. Thankfully, I found a website that actually keeps a blurb of the old background that it would give you if you chose to play as an Inquisitor. So, let us begin. The history of the Sith is fraught with scheming politics and dark secrets. The lifeblood of the Sith Inquisitor. Treachery hides around every corner in the Empire's dark corridors, and survival depends on an individual's natural cunning and the will to manipulate, to defeat their enemies and allies alike. The Inquisitor experiments with forbidden powers to not only survive in this cutthroat environment, but to excel and seize authority. Regardless of potential, few acolytes succeed in facing the rigorous trials to become Sith Inquisitors. Only the most determined acolytes attain such achievement, but these Sith are often the ones to watch. Due to their manipulative genius, Inquisitors are often skilled at exploiting both their enemies and their allies that further their own personal agendas. Channeling this force energy, Inquisitors are capable of draining the life from their enemies, using it to feed themselves and their allies. To reach the highest echelons of power, the Inquisitor needs more than force lightning and a razor-sharp mind. The most formidable Inquisitors dare to explore unorthodox practices by investigating the enigmas of the past and by unlocking new powers for themselves. The Force is a source of unlimited potential, a wellspring Inquisitors tap and bend to their will. Such intensity allows Sith Inquisitors to become architects of the Empire's future, or simply the architects of their own destruction. Let us see now. Will it tell us anything about playing as a sorcerer? Not so much. We can have a look at that later. And so, with Yevrà here, I would like to give you a little bit of background on Yevrà as a character, why she is the way she is, and what you may want to expect, how to understand where she's coming from, and the choices she may make. To give you the full background, I'm actually going to have to begin right to her childhood. After all, she was born probably, during the Great War. The first memory she had was of one of immense fear, of dread, and then being dragged to an escape pod by her father and thrust within it prior to its launching. The tumble through space, and watching the transport she had been upon coming apart after what felt like an eternity. Her pod was picked up by an Imperial recovery vessel. She was promptly fitted with a shock collar and herded to join multitudes of other survivors of their fleet, and they were all told to be privileged to being chosen as slaves to the triumphant forces of the Sith Empire. Over the years, she's learned to endure and survive with her fellow batch of slaves, keeping herself small and busy, trying to avoid notice and yet seemingly busy all at once. Each day, month after month, year after year, working for what felt like an eternity on what little scraps their overseers granted them, as they heard stories of how the war was going oh so gloriously for their Imperial masters. She and her fellow slaves endured. They grew smaller in size, but they managed to keep together, usually finding themselves working alongside other groups of slaves taken as part of the war effort. After years of struggle, Yevrà realized she was different in ways compared to the other slaves around her. She was able to keep working, digging despite the various aches and fatigue she felt, somehow able to draw upon a source of energy throughout herself, and she was barely able to meet her quota, which was considered a rare feat due to the overseer's expectations. Years later, she discovered she was able to summon tools to her, if only by a small distance, but that distance steadily grew, and the sureness of the tool's response started to increase, especially during moments of frustration, or when she started using the memories of the pain she had suffered over her years as a slave. And the best results seemed to be when she remembered the fear, the pain and despair she had felt back on that transport ship, and was able to channel it into creating sparks from her fingertips. This in turn, unfortunately, perhaps, got her discovered by her overseers. She was found practicing on a small cot they had given her for her barely acceptable workload, and brought before a pale figure, a man even the overseers did not want to make eye contact with. He spoke in a soft yet firm voice and offered her a chance for power. That, against tradition, the Sith were seeking those with potential, those that were willing to forego their former ties and perhaps even become something alike to himself in time and training at the Sith Academy. He told her that he had felt such potential with her, and that she was indeed force sensitive, and that he would use a little of his influence to see her off to her future, if only she would provide one task for him. He instructed the overseers to bring the rest of the remaining batch of her slaves before them. He offered her a vibro knife and told her if she wished for his patronage, for a chance to truly free herself of the chains that bound her, both figuratively and sometimes literally, to use that blade and end the lives of her fellow slaves, her lessers now. Yevrà, with her pause of regret, sliced the throats of each of her former slaves, some she may have even called friends. And even now, as she boards a shuttle travelling to Korriban, she can remember the laughter in the voice of the Sith as he congratulated her. Forgive me for waxing poetic a little there, but I thought a little story would be good for us, and to give you an idea that Yevrà is willing to break her chains, to become what she must to survive, and that some of her choices, though extreme, may give her the potential to gain more power and to not be seen as weak in the eyes of those within the Empire. And with that in mind, let us begin the game.
Ah, the last one to arrive is finally here. I hope you don't think you're special. It would be a shame if freedom went to your head. Or if you somehow got the idea you didn't need to pass your trials to become Sith. Lord Zash has tasked me with sorting through you refuse to find one worthy of being her apprentice, and I intend to do just that.
Give us a chance. We can prove ourselves.
We'll just see about that. Now the rest of you gutter trash already know your trial. Get going while I bring our latecomer up to speed.
Watch your back, friend. And don't worry, it'll be all right. He can't kill us all.
I will. And you take care of yourself.
Believe me, I'll be watching back, front, everywhere.
Now, slave, for your trial. There's a hermit named Spindrol who lives in the tomb of Ajunta Paul in the Valley of the Dark Lords. Spindrol's a lunatic, but Lord Zash sees him as some kind of prophet. Once you find him, he will test you.
I'll do my best to please Spindrol and accomplish this trial.
But there, you know your task. Spindrol lives in the tomb of Ajunta Paul in the Valley of the Dark Lords. Don't keep Spindrol waiting, slave.
Ah. Reminds her of her old overseers. Well, she didn't even know her name or recall it for the longest time. She was simply slave. Animal. Whatever names the overseers deemed to call her. And yet here she is. Before the Sith Academy on Korriban. Ah, delightful. We have another potential acolyte here. We shall take a break here, with a nice start to this new series. No doubt there's more we could talk about with Yevrà. Maybe fill in some more of her background, some more of her story. But what I would like to do with this series, like with Caiaphas Cain, is to slow down a little, as I've played so many series, I've played this game so often, it can be so very easy to rush through the content. But I would like to try and take my time, maybe look more at the various codex entries we receive, maybe look at more of the bonus mission series on some of the future worlds we may visit, and just admire the world that BioWare has created for us here in the Star Wars universe. So, I hope you will all enjoy this journey we are newly beginning, and we'll see what happens with Yevrà as time progresses, as her training here to become Sith continues, and how it may further change her as a person. But, as always, thank you again for joining me. Feel free to leave a comment if you so wish. I would greatly appreciate it, especially for this first part to a new series. And hopefully I'll see you for the next part, where we will very briefly be going into the various UI elements I have set up here. And then we'll get ourselves into discovering more about Korriban and the tomb of Ajunta Paul, where we must meet this hermit known as Spindrol. But that is all for next time. Hopefully I'll see you all then. Until then though, take care. Bye bye now.